Well, hello. Let's see, this is my first video in about 2 weeks. I skipped last week. I had some personal matters to take care of. But anyway, I'm back now. And this is this video is about my second attempt at ICM photography. As you probably looked at maybe a few weeks ago, I took my first try at it. And I came across some relatively interesting results. Actually, enough to make me try and get just a little bit better at it and pursue things just a little bit more. So what I did was I went out 2 weeks ago and I tried my hand at it again. And I learned some things, obviously, from the first outing. I learned some things about shutter speed. I learned some things about the focal length. And I learned some things about the way the camera needs to be moved. With ICM photography, there's actually no right or wrong way to do it. The only thing that really matters is the results that you're getting and whether or not you can actually work with those images in post. I've been watching a photographer by the name of Andy Gray, and he is an absolute master at ICM photography. And I picked up a few things from him, and I tried to incorporate those into some of the things that I did. Obviously, I'm not in his class whatsoever, but I do enjoy watching his videos, and it was a pretty good experience doing this. It's not something I'm going to do on a regular basis, but one thing about ICM photography, it's one of those things that you can do pretty much any time and any time of day. Obviously, standard photography requires, in general, for certain things to be a certain way. Exposure-wise and whatnot. Now, ICM photography does require that the exposure be reasonably good, just like standard photography. But there's a lot more leeway, there's a lot more flexibility when doing ICM photography, and that's one of the things I like about it. Now, I do have a background in digital art, so ICM photography, when I saw some of the things that Andy Gray and other photographers were coming up with, it really intrigued me. And I jumped at the opportunity to try and incorporate some of those things into my work. I was able to get maybe 4 images that I thought were reasonably good, and I'd like to share those with you now. And I'll walk you through some of the steps that I took to actually create the image. And hopefully you'll like them, and I would pretty much welcome any feedback about the images. So I'll share those images with you right now. And hopefully you'll give me some constructive criticism on what you think about the images. All right, let's get to it. All right. Let's see. This first image is an image that I shot at an area called Gillies Creek in Virginia. And it's a place that I frequent occasionally. And I've gotten some relatively good shots at this area, so I decided to come back out. This particular day, it's probably around, probably 4:30 in the afternoon when I took this shot. And I was getting some reasonably good side lighting as the sun was beginning to set. And the method was very simple for this. I simply took one shot, and all I did was move the camera up slightly, just maybe an inch or two. I didn't bring it back down, just up about an inch or two. And on this particular shot, the settings were ISO 100, 20 millimeters, f-stop 14, and 1/8 of a second. Now, normally I tended to favor, in my first outing, longer shutter speeds. But in this particular outing, the shorter shutter speeds seemed to work much better. It freezed the motion just enough for my personal liking. And of course, with ICM photography, as with any type of art form, it's very subjective. It's just a matter of some people are going to like it, some people aren't. And I've gotten to the point where I really don't think too much about what other people are going to think. If I'm happy with the image, that's pretty much what I stick with. And that's something I would suggest to any photographer or anyone that's engaging in any type of art form. You have to please yourself first, because you can't please everyone. Okay. Now this next image was taken just maybe about a 5-minute walk from the previous image. And there was a stream coming through, and there was a tree, and actually a series of trees are actually bending across the stream here, right in the center. And if you look basically in the lower center portion of the screen, you can actually see a little bit of water, and there's a very slight waterfall here, and you're getting a stream of water coming through. And basically, when I took this shot, I took made the exposure, and I used one of the things that Andy Gray basically said. He said, you take the initial exposure, you hold it for just a split second before you actually engage the movement. And this is what I did in this particular image. I took the shot, and I moved it basically to the right, just slightly, nothing major. And this was pretty much the end result. It's not a true abstract image, but it does give me something that I rather like. It's not one of the best ICM images I've taken. I think I took a better one the previous week. Right, the settings for this particular image were ISO 100, 26 millimeters, f-stop 8 1/4 of a second. So this particular image was just a little bit longer than the last, so I didn't get quite as much movement in the image. And the images were processed in Photoshop to kind of refine them somewhat. All right, this next image was taken maybe about 100 yards from the very first image that I took. And I came across a couple of really slim, angular trees that were actually leaning into the stream itself. And I basically did the same thing with this image that I did in the first. I pressed the shutter and moved the camera just slightly. The shutter speed on this was 1/6 of a second, so it was even faster than the previous. And it gave me just enough movement to accentuate the image, I feel. As with the previous two images, what I did with this was, in post in Photoshop, I actually added a Gaussian blur. And in addition to that, I manipulated the tint just a little bit to accentuate the color in the image. Now, initially, at the very top of the image, the sky was actually showing. So what I did was I actually cloned that out because I thought it was just a little bit too distracting. And I think that worked out pretty well. Okay, all of the settings for this particular image were, let's see, ISO 100, 50 millimeters, f-stop 10, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, it was a 1/6 of a second. Now, of course, with ICM photography, one thing that you may not think about when you're initially doing this is that at higher focal lengths, let's just suppose you're shooting at 35 millimeters. If you stepped up to 50, 60, or 70 millimeters, movement is going to be much more apparent in the image, as it is in standard photography. So that's something you have to keep in mind. So as the focal length increases, you don't have to move the camera quite as much unless that's simply the intended look you want. So that's another thing that I learned. You come across these things and sometimes you have an aha moment. Oh, okay, I get it now. Because you're actually doing something that's not really second nature to you, and it's not something that you do on a regular basis. Okay, now the last image is actually my favorite image out of the four that I took. Actually, there was a lot of cloud cover coming through the area as I was working my way back. The mosquitoes were also pretty prevalent during that time of day, so I was really trying to get out of there. But as I was leaving, the sun started to peek through the clouds, and I was getting this beautiful side lighting coming through the trees. And I said, wow, I have to get the camera out right now. I said, this is simply incredible. And fortunately, the light held up long enough for me to take this one shot. And as you can see in this image, the trees were illuminated beautifully by the side lighting that was coming through the clouds at that particular moment. And as with the previous images, this was enhanced in Photoshop and Lightroom as well. I beefed up the greens just a bit, and I messed with the tint just a bit. You're getting a nice reddish look on the trees themselves, as well as some nice yellows and different shades from yellow to green. And we also have some dark areas here, which are pretty much burned out. But I think that actually, in ICM photography, in my opinion, that's really not an issue as long as it's not too extensive. And of course, this type of photography is, as with any art form, is subjective. So if it's something that you're happy with, I think it works very well for you. Well, this is actually the last image that I processed on my last outing of ICM photography. And hopefully you like these images. So, if anyone has any suggestions on how I could possibly improve some of my ICM photography, I would love to hear your input on it. I'll probably get out tomorrow and start working on my next vlog for the following week. So, as always, please don't hesitate to comment. Please don't hesitate to like, and hopefully you'll subscribe. So, until next time.